Good afternoon, and thank you all very much for coming. My name is John Blake. I am the Head of Education and Social Reform at Policy Exchange, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event, Teaching the Teachers, Putting Talent Management Back into the School System. So it is no secret that there is a continuous conversation about teacher retention, teacher recruitment, and teacher training. A conversation in which everyone has something to say and sometimes not necessarily a huge amount to contribute. But everyone here has a vast amount to add of worth and value to that conversation to move it forward and to talk about how we generate a genuinely professional profession, as it were, and one in which people feel rewarded and valued and are able to move forward with their careers in a positive and sensible way. The panel is, as I say, of excellent quality, so in order in which they will speak. To my right is the Right Honourable Nick Gibb MP, who is, of course, the Minister of State for School Standards and a constant and stalwart friend of the education reform movement and an excellent advocate for high-quality teaching. And then we will hear from Andy Buck, who is the founding director of Leadership Matters and an expert on leadership training and development. Then Dr. Ben Laker, who is now working with our kind sponsors for this event, Oceanova, on their research into leadership quality. Then from Mark Dawe, the Chief Executive of the Association of Employment and Learning Providers, and then summing up for us, as I know she will do excellently, Dr. Jo Saxton, the CEO and founder of Turner Schools and a huge contributor to the education reform movement over the past 5 years, both at Turner Schools and previously through Future Academies. So on that note, I will turn to the Minister and ask him to start us off, please.
Well, thank you very much, John. This debate about teaching the teachers and all the challenges that we have sought to address in the reform programme in our education system, I've never really considered the quality of teachers in our education system to be one of the challenges. In my view, based on the data and based on visiting for about 13 or 14 years, about 500 schools around the country, the English teaching profession, I believe, is of very high quality. It is very highly educated. The teachers I meet are, to a man and woman, conscientious. They're committed to educating the next generation. The problems, I think, that have confronted our education system relate to the curriculum, to approaches to pedagogy imposed either by government or they're taught to teacher trainees by the ITT sector. Behavioural problems and behavioural policies in schools are part of the problem, by workload, which I think is a severe problem. And workload itself is invariably, in my view, driven by ideology from education academics, ideas such as dialogic marking, ideas such as a skills-based curriculum, a data-driven and vastly overcomplicated assessment system, and by an ideological hostility to textbooks. In my view, teaching continues to be a very attractive profession, and it attracts very high caliber people into it. There are 455,000 teachers in the state-funded schools. There are 15,500 more teachers in our school system today than in 2010, and 14,000 more teachers returned to the profession last year, which is 8% more than in 2011. 94.7% of teachers have qualified teacher status, and in 2016-17, the latest year we have figures, 18% of teacher trainees had a first-class degree, and 74% had either a 2-1 or a first-class degree. So it's important to put this discussion, I think, into perspective. Now, there have been challenges in recent years in recruiting new graduates into teaching, which is the result of having a strong economy, with unemployment now, I'd say, more than a 40-year low, and with huge competition for the best graduates. And it's not a challenge exclusive to Britain. There are similar challenges in some other countries with strong economies, and nor is it exclusive to the teaching profession. Other professions and other businesses face similar challenges. And that's why we're spending hundreds of millions of pounds each year providing generous tax-free bursaries of up to £25,000 in selected subjects to attract the best graduates into teaching, particularly in maths, the sciences, foreign languages, £1.3 billion over the spending review period. Nevertheless, when we did come into office in 2010, there were some things that we did want to change and to address some small weaknesses. So we amended regulations, for example, to ensure that head teachers were able to effectively manage their staff in similar ways to other professions and other businesses. We brought forward the maths and skills test for entry into teacher training to the beginning of the course, and we limited the number of retakes that graduates could take. We asked Sally Coates, Dame Sally Coates as she is now, to chair a panel of experienced heads and academics to revise and simplify the teacher standards against which trainees are assessed and against which teachers are performance managed throughout their careers. A very effective piece of work which I think has stood the test of time and will, I believe, continue to stand the test of time. For example, it requires teachers to have a secure knowledge of their subject. It requires teachers to demonstrate, if you're a primary teacher, a clear understanding of phonics. Teachers have to demonstrate a clear understanding of appropriate teaching strategies. For example, primary teachers, how to teach early numeracy. And they have to have clear rules and routines for behaviour in classrooms and take responsibility for promoting good, and we use the word courteous behaviour, both in the classroom and around the school. And it has a section in it on strong ethical standards in those teaching standards. So I think they are proving very effective, and they influence then what is taught in the education faculties of our universities and elsewhere. And in 2014, we asked Sir Andrew Carter, head teacher of a highly effective primary school in Surrey, to chair an independent review of the quality and effectiveness of ITT courses. And his report identifies gaps in a range of course areas, such as the basics of classroom management and subject knowledge. And in response to his recommendations, we published 3 reports aimed at improving the quality of initial teacher training. So there's a framework of core content that was developed by another independent group we established, chaired by Stephen Munday, and a new behaviour management content for ITT developed and chaired by Tom Bennett, and national standards for school-based ITT mentors, which is absolutely key in developing young teachers into experienced and effective teachers. We are committed going forward to strengthening qualified teacher status. We believe the case for change is strong and that we can do more to raise the status of the profession and support improvements in quality. And we're committed to working with the sector to ensure that we do have the best possible system for formally recognising teachers' professional qualifications. And if you look more widely at what is happening now with the profession itself is taking control of teacher recruitment and teacher training. 56% last year of teacher trainees went through the school-led route, either school direct, or a skit, or teach first. And it's teachers, rather than the education faculties of our universities, who are leading the debates about research and pedagogy and the curriculum. And at conferences such as Research Ed, which has had its 5th year since it was established, and it's now spreading around the world. And the blogosphere now is full of interesting and informed debates about the curriculum and about things like the pedagogy. So I'm very optimistic about the teaching profession. I think now is a good time to join the teaching profession. Promotion and through the system is swifter now than it has been in the past. Able, ambitious graduates coming into teaching can find themselves in senior leadership positions very swiftly, and there are now opportunities to set up and establish a new free school, and there are opportunities to run a multi-academy trust after having served as a head teacher for some years. So now's a good time to join the profession, and I think it all bodes well for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If I can invite anyone who's standing, there are some chairs down here at the front if people want to make their way forward. No, cheese is once again attracting people to stand. Andy, could I ask you to respond?
Thanks very much, John. I think building on what Nick said about workload, behaviour, subject knowledge is absolutely critical. But for me, one of the things that I think is very interesting as a former head is that there's a sense that after the second or third year, that in terms of professional development, teachers tend to plateau in terms of how they keep on learning. It's quite a steep curve at the beginning. And the combination of working in an environment where behaviour isn't always what it might be, where workload is too much, and schools' expectations around marking are unrealistic, we lose too many people. And I think that's inefficient for the taxpayer's pound, because if we were to be able to put back into the schools and the system for training and development for support staff, teachers, as well as leaders in the system, it would be a much better way of using that funding. You'd better leverage a lot more from that. So I thought I might just say a few things about what does this look like then when it's done very well. And there are lots of people that are doing it well. I even think about the work that went on with London Challenge, which is in the previous administration, but much admired, I think, by many in this, which was about releasing what's working best in the system to see leaders and teachers and support staff feeling like they're developing and learning from one another. And of course, it's one of the tenets that underpins both what's happening within multi-academy trusts, that sharing of practice, as well as in teaching school alliances that this government and I had the privilege of helping establish when I was working at the National College for School Leadership. What does it look like when it's good then? And I think this list of 8 things applies to whether you're a teacher, a member of support staff, or a leader in the school system. Number one, that there is a sense that we're doing what we know works from our own personal experience and from what the evidence suggests. Secondly, that is not then taken as dogma, but there's a scope for leaders and teachers to apply flexibly in their context. And with the minimum disruption to children's learning. So it's not about taking people out of the classroom and putting cover teachers in wherever possible. It does need to be over a longer term, so the idea of learning not being a one-off event, but being over a program of at least 2 terms, 2 years even, that it is about a collaborative and peer support network combined with high-quality coaching and mentoring, and very much agree with what Nick was saying before about the work on that in ITT, but I think it also applies actually to people when they take on roles later in their professional careers within schools too. I think that really good professional development includes people working on what I would call an impact project as part of that professional development, where they're looking at, well, what's the difference that what I'm doing is going to make for the pupils that we're here to serve? You can call it action research if you like, but in the end, that's what it's about. And the whole thing needs to challenge the individuals in a positive and empowering rather than in a negative way, and linking that where you can to accreditation seems to me to be very sensible. Finally, whatever this development looks like, whoever's running the show needs to be 100% behind it. So leadership in schools or in multi-academy trusts needs to recognise that professional development and having a route for managing your talent is really, really important. And that talent management then is the last part of this, which is, this isn't about a reactive, oh, someone's leaving, so we better think about what we're going to do. This is about looking at individuals, thinking about where their talents lie, and then helping them in a kind of proactive and positive way to think about what they're going to do. So if I was going to say what needs to change, number one, I think this needs to be higher priority for second and third year in the profession onwards. I think the government has made a smart move right across the public services with the apprenticeship levy, and more about that in a moment, and we'll hear more from other colleagues as well. And thirdly, whatever is happening needs to be done on a sustainable basis, and it's great to see how I think the system, in particular David Carter and others from the department's perspective, are recognising that this is, great schools are great schools for a long period if you sustainably invest in all of this. And I think we've got an opportunity. So again, I think it's a good time. We can build on the best that's already happening. And as Nick talked about, with multi-academy trusts, as the Minister talked about multi-academy trusts, Jo will say a bit about what's happening at great work, which I've privileged to work with Jo on at Turner Schools, but, organisations like ARC and United Learning and so on are doing great things, and we're starting to really see the impact of that leveraging. But teaching school alliances, and I'll just mention one, Forest Way, which is a special school that's leading a teaching alliance in the East Midlands, has created a whole network of really good collaborative learning, but with that high challenge, absolutely the heart of it, is great too. And so, as with Leadership Matters, which is the organisation I lead, and there's a present from us, a copy of a book with the same name in your bags about school leadership, what I think we need to do now is to try and innovate, disrupt in sensible ways, but always being there to help schools deliver what they want to deliver. So I think Oceanova, who have sponsored today, launching the National Institute of Education, is a really exciting potential step. I have some questions. Mark may be able to pick them up a bit more about how do we make the apprenticeship model work in a school context with some of the restrictions around working practices and hours and so on. But I think if we're flexible about that, both in schools and in government, we could do something very exciting. And if Singapore can have a National Institute of Education, why on earth shouldn't we? So, I look forward to having a bit of a debate about the potential for the apprenticeship levy. I'm personally very excited about what it might offer us.
Okay, thank you very much. Ben, do you want to take up the argument?
Thanks, Andy. I'm not a teacher. I'm a researcher, and I study big questions. And for a long time, for about a decade, education has been at the very centre of that, because I think we can all agree that the strength of a nation's economy and the vitality of its society depends on the quality of its schools. One of the fundamental questions I've sought with many colleagues to answer is, why do we as the UK, therefore, lag behind some of our peers despite spending significantly more amounts of money? It doesn't make any sense. So to understand why, I've recently contributed to an 8-year research study which began in 2009, concluded in 2016, and we published our longitudinal findings in the Harvard Business Review. They were provocative, they were challenging. Not everyone wanted to hear them. But ultimately they concluded that the UK system is broken because it appoints, rewards and recognises the wrong types of leaders. The leaders that we found that actually improve exam results in the long term, and that's the key, the long term, which we called architects, are the least rewarded, least recognised, and are rarely developed. And that's the key. They are rarely developed because many leave the profession. So we have the best type of leader who isn't recognised, and worse still, they are not developed and therefore then leave. Not just leave school, but they leave the profession to go elsewhere. Why? Well, it's because they adopt a long-term, sustainable approach to school improvement, which is criminal. These are the people that are exiting our profession. Whilst the levy funding opportunity, valued total at £3 billion, it's a big number, presents a unique opportunity to supercharge our education system by upskilling the entire workforce. We have talked about teachers, but we are considering here the entire workforce. That includes leaders, that includes support staff. We must do this in the right way, otherwise we will simply add to the problem. The problem, of course, is short-termism. All of the high-performing organisations I work with, from Apple to NASA, adopt long-term sustainable approaches to performance, talent management, recruitment and retention. Many of these techniques are in my new book. This is a plug. It is given to you. I'm not asking for any cash. Okay. Google, for example, suggests that one of the most critical elements of any high-performing organisation is psychological safety. And there's a really good article on Harvard Business Review published last month about this. What is it? Well, it's essentially the belief that you won't be punished when you make a mistake. Not if, but when, because we all make mistakes. And in fact, they go further. They don't have the word fail in their organisation. They have the word learn. To be successful, you have to learn. And in fact, the more learning that you undertake, the more successful that you are. But many schools I have observed firsthand lack such mentality. And in fact, as stated in my most recent Harvard Business Review article of 2 weeks ago, 90% of architect leaders, remember those are the ones who have the most sustainable outlook, are almost fired within their second year. It's 90%. That is insane. There is significant amounts of pressure driving them to focus on short term. And therefore, I urge our education system to take this opportunity, this levy-led opportunity, to fundamentally rethink its attitude towards short-termism and adopt a long-term, more sustainable outlook. By doing so, we will not only increase all children's life chances, but also benefit the economy. If we develop more architects, for example, so they represented 50% of our leadership workforce, GDP would increase by up to $7.6 billion, as reported, you may have already read in Forbes, the New York Times, and others. Surely this is the kind of strategic, transformational, and inclusive thinking that we need if we actually want to make a difference and use this levy funding opportunity to supercharge the system. Children's lives and the vitality of the education workforce depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark, what do you have to say about that?
Okay, thank you. So I've been asked particularly to talk around apprenticeships, and I think over £100 million is coming out of the school budgets to the apprenticeship levy. So it's being paid, so it's a sort of use it or lose it type approach, and you will lose it after 2 years. It's made particularly complex for schools because if they're part of a local authority, they're part of a bigger pot of money, or if they're part of a multi-academy trust, again, it's a shared pot, or they may be an individual school where they're not actually even paying the levy. So it's not one size fits all at the moment, but it is a massive opportunity because what people don't understand is it is for existing staff as well as new staff, and there are different ways of looking at it. And how many places do you get, one, you paid your tax, your levy, so you've got to use that up, but then if you go over it, for every 10p you put forward, you get another 90p funding, because the government are funding 90% of all apprenticeships over the levy. So many organisations sort of in other sectors are saying this is fantastic. If we develop our training around apprenticeships, we can actually draw in even more government money over and above our levy. So there are ways of looking at this that are actually very positive, and the engineers, the accountants, the lawyers in particular, the professions are saying we've wanted this for so long. We've had to wait for people to go through the university system and come out the other end before we get them, whereas actually we'd much prefer to have them earlier on, train them and develop them while they're working and getting a degree and work in combination. So real opportunity there. So how does it work practically in schools, or how could it work practically in schools? Because it's very early days at the moment. And I think the easy bit actually is the support staff, because it's easy to see how you can train an HR manager or a finance person or a grounds person. There are standards for that. The levy can be used for that. IT in particular, some really exciting opportunities where, one organisation who's a member of ours, and we represent apprenticeship providers across the board, which is independent colleges and universities. So one of our members is working with primary schools and putting IT apprentices into the primary school. They're doing all the social media, the software, the hardware, and they're supported centrally by the provider, and that's at an apprenticeship level, and actually is transforming the way small schools in particular, are supported. So support staff, that's a relatively easy one. Then actually leadership, again, is actually quite an easy one for existing staff, existing leaders, and that's from first-line management right the way through to heads. There are leadership apprenticeships now. One example, the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute, has got a level 3, a level 5, a level 7. They're being used across sectors because you can teach it in context, but it gives you the leadership skills. It gives you a CMI qualification as well, Chartered qualification. And again, you can look at your management team, and that's the wider management skills, not just purely sector focused. And that's there now to be used. So if you're thinking, what on earth do I do with my levy? Many organisations are saying, actually, we'll do some management training early on and then look at specifically how our talent approach is going to work across all individuals in our organisation. And there are business improvement apprenticeships. There's a whole range of sort of generic apprenticeships which will fit different organisations in different ways. And then the tricky bit, I think, and the thing that's causing the most debate is around teachers. And there's this whole debate about qualifications and all of that. And interestingly, over the last couple of weeks, I've been with a number of large organisations who aren't even looking at qualifications anymore. They do their own assessment because they said the skills the qualifications are showing are not what they're looking for. They're looking for other skills in their organisation. And these are the big companies, very with a lot of respect. So, the way organisations are looking at what they want in their staff is changing quite dramatically. And I was in a session with Jeff Barton from ASCL earlier, and he said, how can I promote both the academic route and the vocational route and not support teacher apprenticeships? It's got to work. We've got to make it work. There are different routes getting to the same point, and I think this is the key thing, that we're not saying we're taking away from the quality of the end point of what we're trying to achieve, but people can get there in different ways. And that's really what the teaching apprenticeship's about. And people might say, well, surely it's not going to meet the school's needs. Well, it's the schools that have designed the standard. It is a trailblazer of school leaders and those that understand teaching that have designed the standard. They've designed the assessment. They have put in there what they believe is necessary for an excellent school teacher. So there should be faith in the sector that the standard, the apprenticeship, is there to support the sector. So I go back to my point that it's different routes for different people getting to the end quality teacher, and this is across all sectors. Many sectors are saying, right, we'll take some graduates, we'll take some apprenticeships. It's actually the mix. It's the mix of background, it's the mix of approach that makes the difference. And I was challenged earlier, I've got 4 children, would I be happy with my kids being taught by an apprentice? Absolutely. If it's part of a school system, if that apprentice is being supported as they should be, absolutely I would have my children taught by an apprentice.
Thank you very much. So Jo, we've had a conversation about the entire training load of the teacher profession, several £1 billion on teacher apprenticeships, and 2 entire books. So can you sum all of that up and respond?
Okay, I'm going to say some other things, in fact.
Okay, add some more. Fine.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that schools are brilliant places to work, and I think it's easy with the various issues that we face to kind of forget that. From my point of view, we get to shape the future, and we get to work with young people using the subject knowledge we love, which is probably why we got into working in schools in the first place. So we mustn't forget schools are great. The perfect storm is here. It's absolutely difficult recruiting in schools, especially where I work on the Kent coast, where half the field for any job is, in effect, the sea. 25% of new teachers have... 25% of those who trained in 2011 have already left the profession. It's thought that some 45% of teachers under the age of 36 don't intend to stay teaching by the age of 40. Again, in Kent, this academic year, so just last month, 40 schools started the academic year without a substantive head teacher. And interestingly, one of my governors, who herself is a practicing head, talked about how in the late 80s she would expect some 200 responses to any job that they advertised, and now she is pleased if she's got more than 2. So something is quite different. We've also got less funding. Again, one of my primary schools, we've got £50,000 less this academic year than we had the year before, and that means that we have to make choices. But the good news is people working in schools, teachers are smart, school leaders are smart, and we love problem solving. We're a challenge-seeking species. And I see that the apprenticeship levy is really a challenge to the sector to think differently about how we solve the problems that we have. If we look at other sectors who don't face the problems we have, if we look at accountancy and law, for example, they've used the apprenticeship route as a way of attracting new people into it who didn't want to get university debt, for example. Having served on the apprenticeship, the teaching apprenticeship standard group, I think it's something that we should be using to attract career changers. Let's not forget, apprenticeships aren't just for 16-year-olds. They can be for 46-year-olds or 56-year-olds. So what is it these other sectors do? If you look at how apprenticeships work in the sectors like accountancy and law, they don't just obsess about what does it mean to be qualified. They're thinking about a trajectory across a number of years. And I think that's the thing that we need to do differently in schools. And I think we have to be, I dread to use the word in front of the minister, personalised in our approach to continuing professional development. But it's often one of the most boring things to be sat in a room for 5 days of the school year, being talked at about whatever it is, something else again. But actually, if you're really focusing on the fact that John would like to know more about the Tudors, that keeps him really interested and wanting to keep coming back to his training. So we have to think about individual teachers, individual contexts, individual communities.
Thank you very much. And it's certainly true. I am always keen to know more about the Tudors.
So, can I say one final thing?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think we all talk about raising the status of teaching, raising the status of the profession. And I think the brilliant opportunity we have with the apprenticeship levy is to actually now do something about it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jo. Well, thank you all very much for that sort of tour of the whole horizon of current professional development of teachers and also the challenges and opportunities of the apprenticeship levy. Now, the opportunity is open to members of our audience to ask questions. I'm told there is no question so outrageous that you can't ask it, provided you tell us who you are and where you are from, so we can track you down if it turns out to be actually too outrageous. So if we could start, gentlemen at the back, and I'll take them in groups of 3.
Hal Thompson. I'm a borough councillor in Spelthorne, North Surrey, and secretary of our local Conservative Policy Forum. We had a Conservative Policy Forum discussion last week, and one of the issues that came up was the extent to which the best predictor of sons' earning power was the parents' earning power. And one of my colleagues at the discussion was a qualified accountant who's subsequently gone into teaching, and he wanted to pass on to his students information about how people acquire wealth. What makes a distinction between what Jeremy Corbyn alleges people lose out on and what we as Conservatives allegedly stand for, the wealthy. And he was effectively prevented from freely offering his advice and experience to the students at his school, and he subsequently left teaching. So my question essentially is, what can we do to change the attitude of people in education about people passing on their expertise in qualifications to the students? Because I think that's a challenge.
Okay, thank you very much. And then gentleman here, and then lady. Just wait for the microphone, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Sabur. I am, by profession, I am a chartered environmental scientist and also educationist. I have one question for the 2 parts. One question is, the first part of the same question is related to the quality of education is the rating, Ofsted rating of the schools. There are so many schools in the United Kingdom. They are on rating, Ofsted rating 3 and 4. So what is your strategy and to improve that rating, because this is directly related to the quality of education. And second part of this same question is regarding the underachiever children. In one classroom, teacher is going to face different level of students. So the students, the children who are underachievers, would it possible that we can arrange extra classes, as a tutorial classes, for them that they could achieve and they could sit with the other students? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pass to the lady in front of you.
Thank you very much. I'm Councillor Mary Martin. I'm from Swindon, which is a unitary authority. But my question, I thank the panel really for wide-ranging and challenging presentations. But my challenge back to Ben is that in industry, I absolutely agree with the philosophy of long-term development and learning from failure, etc., etc., etc. But I'd welcome the panel's view. Is it different in education? Because every single year you have another cohort of children who are coming out of each level with their exams, and whilst long-term, 5 years of developing might be a really good thing, but what about those 5-year cohorts of children who've been, let's call it suffering, while the school improves? So that's just a challenge back to the panel.
All right, thank you very much. Well, Ben, do you want to start off in responding to that, John?
The third question, not the first two.
Yeah,
Okay.
You should be married to her.
Well, that's an interesting offer at this stage today.
It's an offer, I think.
Is it different? Well, I don't see it as fundamentally different. And I think the challenge with the view that we have to focus on what we have right now in front of us. So, for example, that may then lead you to make decisions such as, well, let's move our best teachers to Year 11 because those Year 11 students need it. Or whatever the year group is that's currently taking examinations. Let's divert resources to make sure that what we have right now, students who are about to take their examinations, they're slightly more prioritised than anyone else. And I can get that as an argument, but of course the danger therefore is you are then prioritising certain children's education over someone else's, because then when the next cohort comes through, they're already slightly disadvantaged as the ones who are there now. And I think whilst industry is different to education, one of the key lessons from industry is if you focus on the here and now, you will fail. Because the world around you changes at a faster rate than you can. So you think about Woolworths. A long time ago, Woolworths were brilliant. And then in the end, they focused on the here and now. What is selling today? Penny sweets, DVDs, clothes. In the end, we'll sell anything because it will make a sale today, but we're not focused on long-term vision and long-term strategy. And then when the world changes, you're completely unprepared. You think, why was it that London cabs, this might be a little bit of a difficult example now, but why didn't the cabbies see Uber coming? And why didn't Hilton and other hotel chains see Airbnb coming? Because they're not focused on the long-term future. And if you're not focused on the long-term, you will miss the spark of innovation, which I believe this levy pot provides. It shouldn't be used to think about how we can solve problems today. It needs to be thinking about long-term, 20, 30 years down the line, what do we want this profession to be and stand for? Where should the investment be going to create the biggest impact, which should benefit the lives of all children, regardless of those who are taking exams today, tomorrow, or next year?
Thank you, Ben. Jo, you've worked in improving schools. Do you want to talk about that issue of how you make those decisions about changes now versus changes in the future and how you deal with that improving cohort?
Gosh, well, it's very difficult. I mean, it depends on individual school context, but there are some urgent things that you have to do. Obviously, you've got to make sure that the schools are compliant, legal. You've got to have children attending, and I think you've got to get behaviour right because teachers can't teach if the school leadership and management aren't dealing, first of all, with behaviour. So I think it was brilliant, all the work that was done on ensuring that behaviour was a key part of teacher training. I mean, I think my sort of answer to the gentleman about how do you make sure that the underachievers achieve as well as more able children. The strategies that work well for everyone. So phonics, for example, has proven to make the most enormous for children who are disadvantaged, but it has also helped children who are advantaged. So if you are doing the right things, and that's why it's so important that we continue to educate the school workforce, then those things work for everybody.
Thank you very much. Andy?
Yeah, just add to Mary's point in Swindon, actually, because in a former life, Mary, I was managing director at United Learning, and there was a couple of schools, Swindon Academy and Nova Heriot, and really interesting about the trajectory that those two schools have been on. So we put a brand new team into Nova Heriot, and very quickly that school changed, whereas in Swindon it's just been a much bigger ship to turn round. But this year, well, in fact the last 2 years, they've had a breakthrough in their results. So going back to what Joe's saying, there's something about adapting according to the circumstances you're in and keeping the faith. So I really empathise with what you're saying. I think you have to gently break the cycle of not just always looking at the key examination years And I guess it's working out what does the balance look like in a particular school according to those circumstances. Slightly more provocatively in this audience, I would also say that one of the things that's quite a challenge here is that if one looked at the fact that the market doesn't tend to favour investing in the edges of society, some of the schools that really need the sort of proactive approach that the opportunity areas, for example, are giving, the argument that you just let the poor schools fail and the successful schools grow, then you are going to have 5 years for a child in a secondary school where their school just gets worse and worse and worse over 5 years and then shuts. And I think that that's a lot worse.
Well, first, the point about the teacher, the businessman teacher. Teachers are there to offer a range of views, not just one. So absolutely bring employers in, bring people in to give their view, but the teacher should be giving a balanced view. So, I mean, I think there's an issue there about just saying one thing rather than the spectrum. I want to pick up Ofsted, and the independent training provider sector always get criticised for poor quality, but 80% are good or better. And that's true in the school sector as well, but 20% is not. I think losing the capacity to improve element of grading was a sad loss, actually, because there's the basket case they're never going to improve, or actually it's understood and they're doing something about it. So the capacity to improve, I think, needs to come back in some form. I've been involved twice in taking poor performers to good. So the college I took over as a principal was grade 4 and one of the worst in the country. And it took a number of years, but immediately we started making change. And to me, it's about sustained change. It's not about, all the controversy about off-rolling and all of that. In FE, it was all about cutting the bad courses, and then you didn't have them anymore, so you were just judged on the good stuff. To me, it's about keeping everything, sustaining it, and it's 10 years on, it's still a grade 2. So that to me is important. The other experience I've had is when I moved to Cambridge. Within 6 months, the primary school that my 3 children went to went from a grade 2 to a grade 4. I don't know about cause or effect here, but I had a chat with the chair sort of within the week, and he said he had a few months doing the local play before he could do anything about it. So we had quite an argument, and I became vice chair. And we got it back to a 2 in 14 months. And actually, within months, the changes were happening that needed to happen. So I think once you understand what needs to be done and you get people in there that are actually doing the job, you can make that change quite quickly. And so a year or 2 years or 3 years don't get affected because you know exactly what needs to be done. Everyone knows what a grade 2 school or college or independent training provider looks like. It's just getting the right people in there to make sure that happens.
Yes, taking the first question from Chaplain Spelthorne, predictors of future, it depends on your parents' income. This is resilience, and we perform very badly in the OECD International PISA surveys in terms of the resilience of our young people, and that has been really the driving force behind all our reforms. You want to close that attainment gap between those from families with high incomes and those from families without a high income. So everything we've been doing, for example, the EBAC, phonics, the rewriting of the primary curriculum, when we introduced the new multiplication tables test, that is all about making sure that we are holding schools to account for getting every child to a high level of reading by the time they leave primary school. And we are quite proud of the fact that we are beginning, after 7 years of reform, it takes time to implement those reforms, we're beginning to see that gap closing. The soft bigotry of low expectations is still too prevalent, and I hear it a lot when I talk about the EBAC. And you are half as likely to be taking the EBAC combination of GCSEs if you come from a poorer family than even when you take into accountability. So we have to, that's why I'm so pleased that we've agreed these quite high, ambitious targets for the EBAC. 75% of children taking the EBAC by 2022 and 90% by 2025. It's very important to deal with this very issue of resilience. In terms of Ofsted, 90% of schools are either good or outstanding. 1.8 million more pupils today are in good or outstanding schools compared to 2010, and that isn't, as the Secretary of State said yesterday, that's not an accident. That has happened because of our policies. But we need to get the extra 1 million children who are not in those schools, so the schools you referred to as 3 and 4. We need to get those schools to improve as well. That's what the opportunity areas are all about, and we're putting a lot of resources into those areas where the schools are still underperforming. In terms of what do we do for underachieving children, again, that's all about high expectations. It's also about funding. So in the new national funding formula, there is an element that you get extra money if your children starting the school come with low prior attainment, whether that's low prior attainment from the early years setting coming into primary, or whether it's low prior attainment when you leave primary school coming into secondary. And we upped the proportion of the funds that would tackle that. I'll stop there. I can come back to some of the comments on the panel later on.
Okay, thank you very much. Further questions, please? Lady over here.
Hello panel, I am Bethany Wright and I'm just studying philosophy at university at the moment. So my question is, why does a knowledge-rich curriculum get caricatured as right-wing and opposed by many in education when its purpose is to promote social justice?
Cracking.
How long have you got?
Any other questions? Gentleman here. If you just wait for the microphone.
Okay, a question about Ofsted.
Yes.
About Ofsted.
Sorry, name and organisation.
Yes. After pretty well 20 years as a school governor at a particular local secondary school, where we'd gone from being fairly average to having 2 consecutive good Ofsted reviews, the head teacher was then asked to put his arm round or take over a secondary school a little bit down the road, which wasn't achieving particularly well. And Ofsted thought that we could actually run our school and run this school and bring it up to standard. I could see their logic, but I was a little bit disappointed that, of course, we'd actually got our school to a particular place where we were very satisfied and it was doing well. And in trying to get the head teacher to be competent to handle 2 secondary schools, we thought was presenting a challenge which might or might not work.
Okay. And what's your name, sir?
Councillor Nick Martin.
Thank you very much. And final question at the back there. Lady at the back.
Hello.
Name and organisation, please.
Right. I'm Mary Brown and I'm from Sherwood or Newark, depending. I have a problem because I've just moved house. I actually was a trainee teacher in the 70s, and I have to say I never taught. And my reason for not teaching was the agony to experience left-wing infiltration within those schools. Now, my question is not an easy one, because how are we going to deal with the infiltration, which is certainly there in the schools that I know of, where politics is taught with a red flavour, which I know it shouldn't be. At the same time, do we think that by training the teachers better once they have qualified, and I think that's a good idea, whether that could improve the job satisfaction and therefore change that colour from red to blue?
Okay. I think we've probably got time for just one final question from the gentleman there, and then we'll...
Thank you. Paul Harrison. I'm now an education consultant. I was a secondary head teacher for 15 years. I just want to comment on a couple of the points that have been made from Jo about teacher retention. It's a picture I recognised. It used to break my heart when I had really good teachers who left the profession after 3 years. And it was partly because of the stresses and strains they faced, but also the comment that Ben made about longer term. And I think one of the issues has been the longer term vision, the constant changes at the structural level in terms of qualifications, in terms of the way that schools are organised and managed, I think has added to that stress and contributed to the retention issues. And I just wanted to give one example as well about the longer term vision from the government, and that is primary languages. I was asked to go and deliver some primary training for language teachers who were in the primary schools. but they didn't have the basic language skills. So we have a long-term vision about primary languages, but we don't have the workforce equipped to teach it.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so that's all of primary and secondary curriculum and basically everything in the education system. So if we can get through all of that in the next 5 minutes, that'll be grand. If we start with Mark.
So there's a couple of things that the Minister and I are never going to agree on. And one is the EBAC. So I 100% believe that every child should have access to the EBAC in every school. That is a given, but it is not necessarily right for 90%. And actually it will build resilience because a chunk of learners will understand what failure is over and over if we keep pushing the EBAC in the way it's being pushed. I was really pleased with Progress 8 because it allowed either to do the EBAC and the academic qualifications for everything, or for some individuals to bring in some vocational in those 8 qualifications they did. And I worry that actually it's not going to work in the way that everyone thinks it's going to work, and pushing people down a pure academic route has failed time and time again. The other thing we are going to disagree on is I don't believe that phonics is right for bricklayers and caterers, which is what's being put into functional skills proposals. So
the evidence says it is.
Well, there's plenty of differing evidence.
No, there's no other evidence.
Controversial.
Let me see the evidence.
No, and
there's assertions that it is.
This is like
wait, you'll have your turn.
This is like insisting that 16 to 18-year-olds have to keep doing their GCSE over and over and over again. And it's wonderful that 24% pass, but it's tragic that 76% fail, and then they fail again, and then they fail again. And the way GCSE is designed and the way GCSE is marked, it will keep happening. Whereas if you've got functional skills, which is more of an over-the-line qualification and is actually relevant to the learning that's going on, and actually employers really like functional skills. You never hear an employer complaining about the maths and English of an apprentice, and those apprentices are doing functional skills. They can do percentages, whereas when the employers complain about individuals coming in with GCSEs, it is the functional maths and English that those GCSE students can't do. So we will continue to differ, I'm sure, Minister, but there is plenty of evidence to counter what you're saying as well.
Thank you very much, Mark. We shall save the Minister and unleash him in a few moments. I'll go to you, Andy. You want to respond to anything?
Yeah, just a couple of questions, if I may. Nick, with your school governor hat on and the resonance of we've worked really hard to get our school to where we've got it to, and then does the head working somewhere else put that at risk? I think is a genuine and properly felt kind of response or emotion to that situation. I think, though, that one of the things that was quite remarkable about what's happened in, and this has been replicated in other places apart from London, in Manchester, in various different places. The idea of schools and school leaders, school communities saying, we're here to teach the children of London or whatever the area is, rather than the children that just happen to go to our school, is, as I was saying earlier, only one of, but I think an important one of the reasons why that region went from being the lowest performing to the highest performing over that 7-year period. People had a kind of a moral imperative to do something for the children in their region. But what I think is a byproduct of that is thinking about your head, and this comes back down to what's the individual circumstance, and I think it's a very important judgment for a governing body to make, because giving that head the stretch at that point in their career might be a stretch too far, or it might be just the stretch they need to feel like they're being personally challenged to become effectively an executive leader rather than just the leader of their own school. And that might be the thing that keeps them at your school for another 5 years, where otherwise they might go somewhere else. I don't know your circumstances. But the other thing that then happens is when someone there moves, what you get is this kind of backfill that ripples down through a school of people stepping up, sometimes even for a day or two a week or whatever it is, that gives them that fresh challenge. And so it can energise, and particularly in an area where teaching movement isn't so great, it can energise the development, the professional development opportunities for everyone in it. But to go back to your initial concern, I think that has to be a carefully thought through decision rather than something that's just, we'll do that then, because sometimes that doesn't work if you don't do that.
Thank you very much, Andy. I mean, Jo, would you like to address the knowledge-rich curriculum issue? Or any?
Golly. So, the knowledge-rich curriculum, why is it put down? It's a very good question. It makes absolutely no sense to me at all. It seems a total no-brainer that there is a broad foundation of subject matter which has stood the test of time, and everyone should have access to it. And even if you are, if your passion is to be a plumber or hairdresser or work in catering, as a number of the kids in the schools that I run want to do, I still think that they need to know about the history of our nation. I think they need to know where the first laws came from. I think they need to know all of the physical geography of the world to be able to be the citizens that our nation needs. Yeah, I think it's great, and I don't understand why everyone else doesn't.
John, can I just add to that? I think sometimes this is characterised as a kind of debate between knowledge and skills, which I think is unhelpful, actually. For me, one of the biggest skills we have, apart from, if you call resilience a skill, but a predisposition, is the ability to think about things and draw conclusions and make decisions. And the problem, if you don't have a good knowledge base, is that you get people to think you're thinking about rubbish. Right. And what you need to do is you need to give them the knowledge and then give them the opportunity to really challenge it and think about it and come to some conclusions on the basis of knowing some decent stuff. Yes. So I don't think it's an either or. I think they fit together beautifully, but the knowledge has to come first.
Yes. Ben, any brief thoughts, I'm afraid, at this stage? Anything?
On the literacy of this nation?
Yeah, go on then.
I'm all right.
Yeah. Minister?
And not qualified to answer that.
Go on then.
Well, okay. I'm going to start with the knowledge. That's a very good question. Bethany, right, I need your card afterwards for asking the question. But tomorrow night, 6:30, in this place, I'll be speaking slightly longer because no one else is allowed to interrupt on this very issue. And it's a terribly important question. And actually, Mark touched upon it. He said why we don't want to be pushing children down an academic route. Well, what age do you not want to push children down an academic route? 12? 10? Are you saying you should start doing vocational things at 5? No, no one is saying that. Everyone thinks that 5-year-olds need an academic education. You've got to learn to read, you've got to learn to do maths. What, 7? My view is it shouldn't be 14 because we live in a very sophisticated, technically demanding world where everyone needs an academic education. And I think, and Alison Wolfe thinks, it should be 16 because you need to know so much. Why do we say that bright kids can finish their academic education at 16 or 18 or 21, but a less able child should finish at 14? It is absurd. It should be the other way around because they need to be able to read and do maths to cope with the modern world. And if they're not coping at GCSE level, they need to keep studying it until they can cope. Now, the functional skills, we have reformed them because they were very, very weak qualifications. They were not preparing young people for the world of work. And of course, the way you teach them will differ if they're not young people who are naturally comfortable in the classroom context. But this phonics issue in the functional skills isn't for those, it's the entry level functional skills. These are people that can't read. And all the evidence is, at whatever age you are, if you can't read, you need to learn the basics, the fundamental building blocks of how to read. I know what the letters of the alphabet, what sounds they make, and how to blend them in together. And we got expert reading people to help us with that change to the functional skills. And we took out the bits in it about body language to prevent body language being taught in English lessons to 16-year-olds who had struggled at school to read and write. And we have now, I think, a very, very high-quality functional skills product that will help young people survive in the modern world. And I'm delighted by the product that we've finished. And I think, actually, for children that got a D grade at GCSE Maths and English, they are within spitting distance of getting a C. They should continue to study English and maths until they get the C. It's not about just retaking multiple times without studying. It's about studying. The weakness in our FE sector in this area is the teaching. And that's something we have to address in the FE sector to make sure children are being taught properly. So that's my little rant about that. And I wanted to just talk about the final point about Paul Harrison's point about teacher retention, because it fits in with Ben Laker's important work about architects and surgeons. I remember when the report came out and thought absolutely right. And when I left office for my phone call from the Prime Minister on my birthday in September 2012, and I thought I mentioned that now, other than self-flagellation. But
Architects and
Retention.
yeah, well, when I came back, oh yes, right. When I came back, he called me back, and I came back into office. I got the same job, and I discovered that David Laws, in the meantime, who sat in my desk in the intervening 21 months, had raised the floor standards for primary schools to 85%, getting the expected standard reading, writing, maths. Now, that would mean about 3/4 of schools would be below the floor. And this is what worries me about how we manage our education system. Policymakers think the way to raise standards is to set a higher standard, and if you don't meet that standard, we're going to bash you around the head with a mallet. And if a year later you still haven't reached that standard, we're going to bash you even harder. That, to me, is an absurd way of managing any organisation. As I said at the beginning of this session, I think we have a very highly qualified teaching profession. They're conscientious, they want to do the best for their children. When they fail, it is because they're not trying, it's because they're doing the wrong things in the schools, whether it's pedagogy or curriculum. So what we should be doing is helping schools become surgeons and doing the right thing. And we should be having a debate, not about where the floor standard is, but how we teach reading, how we teach mathematics, what's in the curriculum. Let's have a debate about the history curriculum, the skills versus knowledge debate. Do you want to teach 12-year-olds to be historians, or do you want to teach them the knowledge of the history of this country and the world? So these are the debates we should be having, and if we could do that and properly engage in an honest way with the profession about these issues, instead of putting these absurdly high there should be accountability, of course, absolutely, and we do have to take action for schools that are rated by Ofsted as 3 and 4 and so on, that are failing children up and down the country. But I think we just need to have a more mature relationship between policymakers and the school system so we can work together to actually address the issues that are causing schools to underperform. Our second round, sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we must end that here. We can say that the Minister has no need to self-flagellate, for, as we can see, the Minister is still here, but the Prime Minister is gone. So thank you all very much for attending, and thank you all very much for your contributions today. I'll point out that we have a full programme of events tomorrow, including the one that the Minister was so kind to preview for us of his speech tomorrow at the end of the day, so do feel free to come back for that or for any of the other events. I have a brief note that was just written on here, which just says the words "vacate at speed," which I think is a gentle request that we have to reorganise the room for our next event. So delighted we all are to see you. If we could see you outside, that would be best. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Oceanova, for their sponsorship. Thank you.